When I look back over my life, the man I was, the way I thought, the things I believed, it's easy to assume I chose that path. But the truth, the hate I carried, it wasn't born in me. It was planted, watered, cultivated. I didn't come into this world angry. I didn't show up filled with suspicion. No, that came later. It came from the stories I was told, the conversations I overheard, the jokes that were never really jokes, the warnings whispered under breath like they were gospel. I was taught to be afraid of Muslims before I even knew what a Muslim was. It didn't come from a book. It didn't come from a direct experience. It came from my surroundings, from people I trusted, from family members who thought they were protecting me, from friends who repeated the same narrow views they'd heard from their parents, from TV screens that painted entire cultures with one brushstroke: angry men, dangerous women, strange languages, strange clothes, strange prose, strange prayers. It was never a classroom lesson, but make no mistake, I was being schooled, and it stuck, because when you're a kid, you absorb it all. You don't question it. You take it in like air, and before long, it becomes part of how you see the world. You start building walls before you ever meet the people on the other side of them. You start to think your fear is wisdom, that your distrust is just common sense. But here's what I didn't realize until much later. Hate is easy when it's abstract. It's easy when it's distant. It's easy when it's fed to you in quiet moments over years and years until it settles into your bones like truth. But that kind of hate, it isn't something you really choose. It's something you inherit. And just like a family heirloom, you carry it thinking it's yours, thinking it's part of your identity, until one day, if you're lucky, you realize you don't have to keep it. You don't have to hold on. I spent 30 years thinking I knew who to trust, who to fear. 30 years building a belief system on shadows, on things I couldn't see, wouldn't question. I thought I was strong. I thought I was aware. But really, I was just afraid. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of facing what had been poured into me when I was too young to stop. And the truth is, there are a lot of people walking around today with that same weight, carrying someone else's fear like it's their own truth. You see, hate doesn't start with a violent act. It starts with a look, a whisper, a joke, a warning passed down like family tradition. And over time, those small things become a story you tell yourself, a story about who's us and who's them. And if no one ever interrupts that story, if no one ever challenges the lie, it becomes your whole world. But that hate, it can be unlearned. It must be unlearned. Because when you finally see the humanity in someone you were taught to fear, when you see the kindness, the courage, the grace, it doesn't just break the lie, it shatters it. And what you're left with is the truth. That love, compassion, faith, courage, those things don't wear one face. They're everywhere. They've always been. I didn't choose to hate, but I do choose to heal. In that choice, that's where everything changed. Fear is a liar. Not the kind that shouts, not the kind that storms into a room and demands attention. No, fear whispers. It slides into your mind when you're not paying attention. It speaks in quiet doubts, in anxious thoughts, in assumptions you never stop to question. And it's most convincing when it talks about people you've never met. That's the thing. Fear feeds on distance. The further someone is from your life, your world, your experience, the easier it is to believe the worst about them. It's simple to stereotype a face you've never seen up close. It's effortless to mistrust a name you've only read in headlines. That's how fear grows strong, in the spaces where understanding hasn't been invited in. I didn't know a single Muslim growing up, not one. Never shared a meal with one, never sat across from one in a real conversation, but I knew how to fear them. Isn't that wild? I couldn't tell you the first thing about their beliefs, their lives, their families, but I was sure I should be afraid. That fear didn't come from experience, it came from absence, from never seeing them as real people, just shadows at the edge of the narrative I'd been handed. And fear, when it's left alone, becomes a habit. It settles in quietly and disguises itself as instinct. You start to flinch at things you don't understand. You cross the street without thinking. You hear an accent and suddenly your brain is already finishing a sentence it has no business writing. That's not intelligence. That's not caution. That's fear doing its job, keeping you isolated, keeping you ignorant, keeping you small. The lie fear tells us this: you're safer this way. It says, don't get close, don't engage, don't question what you've heard. Because fear knows that the moment you do, its power starts to fade. See, once you sit with someone, once you break bread with them, once you hear their story, laugh with them, cry with them, fear loses its grip. You can't hold on to hate when you're face to face with someone's humanity. It just doesn't work. That's why fear thrives in echo chambers. It loves one-sided stories. It loves headlines without context. It loves people staying in their own corners, never stepping outside their comfort zones. Because out there, outside those zones, is truth. And fear can't survive too much truth. I learned that the hard way. The man I feared, the one my younger self would have avoided, judged, maybe even crossed the street to avoid. He saved my life. He didn't ask about my beliefs. He didn't care where I came from. In a moment that could have ended in tragedy, he saw me as a human being, and he acted with compassion, with courage, with love. That shattered everything I thought I knew, because suddenly fear had no legs to stand on. Everything it whispered for years, gone in one act of grace. That's the power of proximity. That's the danger fear is terrified of: connection. When we get close enough to understand each other, fear becomes exposed. It's seen for what it is. Not wisdom, not protection, just a coward in disguise. So if you're carrying fear, if there's a group, a faith, community you've been taught to look at sideways, ask yourself, have I ever actually sat with them? Not read about them, not listened to someone else's opinion, but truly seen them. Because if you haven't, maybe it's not truth you're holding on to. Maybe it's just distance and fear and a lie you no longer have to believe. Sometimes the moment that changes everything doesn't come with a warning. It doesn't arrive with a headline or a drum roll. It slips in quietly, disguised as just another day. And then a single instant, everything you thought you knew, everything you believed about the world, about people, about yourself, gets turned on its head. I wasn't expecting anything that morning. It was supposed to be routine. I was going about my day carrying all the same baggage I'd carried for years. Judgment, assumptions, walls built high around my mind. I'd gotten comfortable in my narrow view of the world, comfortable thinking I had people figured out. That certain kinds of people, certain faces, certain fates were simply not safe. That they were other. That they were the reason the world was dangerous. And that my distrust? It was justified. But life has a way of testing your beliefs, especially the ones built on fear. I found myself in a situation that turned serious fast. Real danger, real panic, no time to think. And in that chaos, when I needed help most, the last person I would have expected was the one who stepped in. Not just stepped in, ran toward the danger, put themselves in harm's way for me, a stranger. A man who, by all rights, probably felt the weight of my judgment long before I ever spoke a word. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask who I was, or what I believed, or where I stood on anything. He didn't care that we came from two different worlds, maybe even two different sides of a conversation filled with pain and misunderstanding. In that moment, all he saw was a human being who needed help, and he acted, not out of duty, not for credit, not for recognition, but out of something deeper, something pure. That's when it hit me. Humanity doesn't knock on the door and announce itself. It just shows up, right when your guard is down. Right when the walls you built start to crack. Right when your ideas about who's good and who's bad are about to collapse under the weight of real-life grace. I'd spent so long convinced I knew who the enemy was, so long feeding this narrative in my head. And then it flashed, the truth came roaring in. I was wrong. This man, this Muslim man, he didn't just save my life. He saved me from continuing down a path of ignorance and arrogance. He saved me from myself. You can spend your whole life looking at people through a filter someone else gave you. But the second you witness kindness from the person you were taught to hate, that filter shatters. It doesn't matter what you believed before. It doesn't matter how many arguments you had or what you thought you understood. When someone shows you their heart in a moment of truth, that's it. That's the moment humanity breaks through. And it breaks through hard. That kind of moment doesn't just leave a dent, it leaves a scar in the best way. A mark that reminds you not to judge too quickly, not to assume, not to carry fear into spaces where curiosity should live. That one act of courage, of compassion, did more to change me than decades of information ever could. Because when it comes down to it, we don't change because we're told to. We change because something touches us, moves us, interrupts the story we've been telling ourselves and writes a better one. That's what happened to me. And it started when I least expected it, but exactly when I needed it most. It's a strange thing, realizing the person you were taught to fear is the very one who saves you. Not just saves you from danger, but rescues you from a prison you didn't even know you were in. A prison made of old beliefs. That kind of salvation doesn't just change your opinion, it changes your identity. It strips away everything you clung to in order to feel safe, and in its place, it leaves something far more powerful. Truth. I grew up believing the world was split into us and them. That some people were simply not to be trusted. It wasn't always said out loud, but it was clear in the way people looked at the news, the way they spoke in lowered voices, the way entire cultures were reduced to a single word: dangerous, enemy. And when you hear something long enough, even if it's never proven true, you start to build your life around it. You build walls that don't just keep others out, they keep you in. So when I found myself needing help, real help, life on the line kind of help, I wasn't expecting it to come from the kind of man I'd spent years avoiding. He didn't look like me, didn't pray like me, didn't speak like me. By every measure of the world I had known, we were supposed to be on opposite sides. And yet when everything hit the fan, there was no hesitation in him. No question, no condition. He moved without fear, without judgment, with only one mission: to make sure I lived. That moment, that single soul-shaking moment broke something in me. And thank God it did. Because as I lay there afterwards, safe because of him, I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had believed. Every ignorant word I'd spoken. Every time I nodded along when someone joked about those people. Every time I changed the channel when their stories came on the news. Every time I looked through someone instead of at them. And now, here I was, alive because of the exact kind of man I had spent my life avoiding. That's not just ironic. That's divine intervention. What hit me hardest wasn't just the act of bravery. It was the humanity, the compassion, the peace in his eyes when he told me I'd be okay. The way he stayed until help came. The way he asked for nothing. He wasn't performing. He wasn't proving anything. He was just being, and that shook me to my core. Because I had dehumanized people like him for so long. I didn't know how to receive that kind of grace. You start to question everything after something like that. You replay the conversations, the lessons, the inherited fear, and you start to realize it was all built on nothing. A house of cards, a story told by people who were scared or hurt or simply didn't know any better. But now I did. Now I knew. Salvation doesn't always come wrapped in light. Sometimes it comes in the form of the person you once feared most, offering you their hand. When you take it, something breaks, but something more beautiful begins. You start the painful but necessary process of shedding the old you, the closed-off, small-minded version of yourself. And in its place, you become someone who sees clearer, someone who listens deeper, someone who finally understands that the real enemy was never the other. It was the ignorance within. That man saved more than my life that day. He saved my future. And with every breath I take now, I try to honor that salvation, not just with words, but with action, with growth, with humility. Because once you've been saved by the enemy, you can never look at the world the same way again. And that is the true beginning of peace. There's a moment, if you're lucky, when the mirror finally stops lying to you. When it doesn't reflect the version of yourself you've carefully crafted, the one who always has an answer, who walks with certainty, who justifies his opinions with pride. No, this mirror shows you the raw truth. The version of you that's been hiding behind ignorance, behind fear, behind the easy comfort of being alright. And when you see it, really see it, doesn't feel like discovery. It feels like a gut punch, like something inside you has been cracked wide open. That's what reckoning feels like. After he saved me, I couldn't sleep for days. Not because of the fear, not because of the close call, but because of what it revealed in me. I started reliving conversations I'd had, things I'd said without thinking, looks I'd given people. The way I crossed the street when I saw a man in a long robe or heard someone speaking a language I didn't understand. And I felt it. Shame. Deep, quiet, persistent shame. Not the loud kind that makes you cry out. The kind that settles into your chest and stays there like a stone. The kind that whispers, you knew better, and you did it anyway. That shame doesn't just come from what you've done. It comes from what you didn't do. The times I stayed silent when people made hateful comments. The moments I laughed just to fit in, knowing deep down the joke wasn't funny. It was cruel. The way I never once asked myself, what if I'm wrong about all of this? Because being right felt safer than being vulnerable. But when someone saves your life, when someone you've judged without cause shows you grace you never deserved, there's nowhere left to hide. I had to face the fact that the problem wasn't just the world I came from. It was me. I chose not to look deeper. I chose the easy road, the road paved with assumptions and surface level understanding. And now that road had ended. The detour I was on. It wasn't just a change of path, it was a change of self. But here's the thing, reckoning, as painful as it is, isn't the end of the story. If you sit with it long enough, if you stop trying to escape the discomfort and actually feel it, that pain can open a door. And through that door comes something else. Not comfort, not absolution, but awakening. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a lightning bolt or a single revelation that changed everything. It was slow. A new question here, a hard conversation there. Listening to voices I had ignored, reading things that didn't align with what I thought I knew. Sitting with the discomfort instead of pushing it away. And most of all, remembering the look in that man's eyes as he helped me. Steady, kind human. That's what awakening looks like. It's not a clean process. It's messy. It stings. You lose parts of yourself. The prideful parts, the arrogant parts, the parts that needed to be lost. But what you gain is real. You gain awareness, empathy, a deep, unshakable humility that wasn't there before. You start to see people again. Not as categories, not as headlines, but as full, complex, sacred beings. The shame I felt didn't disappear. It still visits me from time to time. But now, it doesn't hold me down. It reminds me of where I was, of who I could have remained had life not shaken me awake. And every day since, I've tried to walk forward with my eyes wider, my heart softer, and my mind open. Because once you awaken, truly awaken, you can't go back to sleep. Not if you're honest, not if you're human. There comes a point when survival isn't enough. When waking up in the morning isn't just about breathing in and out, it's about meaning, about direction. About asking yourself not just what do I want, but what am I here for? That kind of question doesn't show up in comfort. It arrives after something breaks you wide open. For me, it came after a man I had no business trusting. Because of what I'd been taught, because of what I believed. It saved my life. It would have been easy to call it a lucky break, a strange twist of fate, say a thank you and move on. But I couldn't. I didn't move on because something in that moment rewrote me. Not just the event itself, but what it exposed. I had lived a life shadowed by prejudice. Quiet, passive, polite prejudice. The kind that wears a smile in public but flinches in private. The kind you don't even question because it feels normal until something undeniable confronts it. When he helped me, when he risked himself for me, it didn't just save my body, it saved my vision, my view of people, my view of purpose. It revealed how much time I'd spent walking blind in a world full of color, full of life, full of stories I never bothered to hear. And once that switch flipped, once the illusion fell, I couldn't go back to living small. So I started over, not by forgetting the past, but by owning it. By holding it up to the light. I stopped pretending I had it all figured out. I started asking better questions. I sat in rooms that once made me uncomfortable. I listened. I learned. I wept over things I once would have ignored. And slowly, step by step, I began to rebuild. Not just my beliefs, but my mission. Gratitude did that. Real gratitude. Not the kind you say at dinner to be polite. The kind that grabs your soul and demands you do something with it. That kind of gratitude doesn't let you stay still. It pushes you to give back, to heal what you once harmed, to speak where you once stayed silent, to stand beside those you once stood apart from. I began showing up in community spaces, in difficult conversations, in circles I would have never dared enter before. Not as a savior, not as someone with answers, but as someone finally willing to learn, finally willing to serve. I started connecting with people from all walks of life, not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I needed to witness the humanity I'd spent so long avoiding. And what I found: beauty, struggle, resilience, forgiveness, A world that had always been there, I just refused to see. Now my life is no longer about comfort. It's about contribution. It's about reaching out instead of recoiling, building bridges instead of walls, telling my story, not for sympathy, but as a warning, a mirror, a reminder of how easily we can fall into fear and how powerful it is when we choose to rise from it. I owe that man more than my life. I owe him the man I've become. And though I may never be able to repay that moment, I can honor it with how I live, how I love. That's what gratitude looks like in action. That's what purpose sounds like when it finds its voice. So now I walk through the world not just asking, what can I get? But what can I give? Not just who do I belong to, but who still feels alone. Because the story of my life isn't about the day I almost died. It's about the day I truly began to live.